Now for something completely different. G'day to all you lovely people. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Kathy, and today we are going to talk about not a fantasy author, but a historical romance one, Georgette Heyer. She is one of my all-time favorite authors. I have loved her since I was a teenager, actually. In fact, I was introduced to this author by a nurse when I was laid up in hospital when I was around 13. She gave me these old shades, which is this. Not this particular volume, but another one which I wore to death because I read it so often it fell apart. Now, Georgette Heyer didn't just write historical romances. She also wrote mystery novels, though I did not read any of those. I loved her historical romances. In fact, I loved romance back then. Heyer's historical romances are usually set either in the Georgian era or Regency times. And my understanding is that it is due to Heyer that there is a subgenre, I guess, called Regency romances, where books are based in a particular time period in England's history. It's usually English. It's from, I think, 1811 to around the 1850s, though the actual Regency period was a little shorter. Her characters are usually upper class. She very rarely touches on hunger or poverty or diseases, though there is one book where she did deal slightly with that. Her books are not meant to be commentary on the times. They are meant to be historical romances. Her main characters are, I think, so memorable that if you mention one of the characters, I can probably remember what happens and from which book they came, which is not something I can say about a lot of other romances that I've read over the years. She has a range, I think, of different female characters. Her males tend to be either very much a trendsetter or a scoundrel. I love the scoundrels myself, but generally this is what her heroes are like. But what is so wonderful about her books is how funny they are. I will just sit and giggle as I'm reading any of her books, and I reread them all the time. I think I own almost all of her historical romances, and I've read most at least, 7 or 8 times. I pick them up every couple of years and I just read the whole lot of them. Of course, there are some that I prefer to others, but overall, they're always entertaining. And I actually love all the detail she has in her books regarding the periods that she's writing about, whether it's Regency or Georgian. For someone who did not know anything about this time period, I found I learned so much through her books. Things like snuff boxes. I had never heard of snuff boxes when I was 13. Or the marriage mart, Almax. All these things that I was unfamiliar with. Georgette Heyer was born, I think, in 1906, somewhere around there. So she wasn't alive when the Regency period actually took place. And my understanding is that she had over 1,000 reference books about the Regency era in particular, so she could be as accurate in her detail. I have read a criticism that Heyer has too much detail. She goes into too much minutiae regarding the clothing or the manners or other things relating to that period, whereas Jane Austen doesn't. However, Jane Austen was writing books that were contemporary at that time. She didn't base them in the past, she based them in her time period. So of course anyone reading Austen's books when they were published knew very well all the detail regarding, say, clothing or manners or anything like that. Heyer was writing much later. In my opinion, the detail actually enhances her books. It makes it seem more authentic to me. She has also written a few other historical books based on real characters, like William the Conqueror, who conquered England in 1066, the Battle of Hastings. It's very famous. She's written several books like that. They're not really my favourites, though I do like The Conqueror itself. As I said earlier, I was introduced to her when I was only 13, and I swear I did not understand half of what I read on the very first page. Who the hell knew what a monocle was at 13? I'd never read that. Or pantaloons, or snuff boxes. There was just so many things I didn't understand, so I had to have a dictionary with me. But from the very beginning, I loved her writing style. And considering her first book she wrote at the age of 17, it kind of surprises me at just how talented Heyer was. She's an excellent writer with a great grasp of language, but her dialogue, I think, is the best. It is hysterically funny. That's what I think anyway. Her characters are really funny. Like any romance, there might be some mix-up or misunderstanding, or usually there is some mystery that needs to be resolved, something minor. The characters may be at loggerheads for whatever reason. That really doesn't matter. It's the interaction between the characters that is worth reading about. And I love that it is so understated, that so little is actually shown because of the time period that the books take place in. These are not demonstrative characters. It is through the dialogue that you can work out what each person is feeling. I consider her to be similar in vein to Jane Austen or the Bronte sisters, and yet easier to read in my opinion, and very enjoyable, much funnier, I think. As I said earlier, I was introduced to her when I was only 13, and I discovered romance then, so I loved reading romances. But over the years, my interest in romance has really waned. I still own quite a few, but I don't read them. Very few, but I always read Georgette Heyer, always, because I don't consider them to be similar in style to, say, Mills and Boon's or Harlequin romances or the bodice rippers. I don't know how else to describe them. The historical romances with very graphic sex in them. Usually their characters are too perfect, whereas I can't say that about Heyer's characters. They seem more genuine, more real. And I still read them to this day. In fact, I'm probably due a reread. And they are very fast reads too, because they're not very long books. Now I thought I'd give you a list of some of my favourite Georgette Heyer historical romances. And this is by no means a complete list. To be honest, I love nearly all of her historical romances. There are some that are not my favourites, but I think it's only one or two. But this lot are definitely my favourites. And the first is These Old Shades. No surprise, it was the very first one I read, so of course it has sentimental value as well. This one is based in the Georgian era and takes place in France as well as in England. Leonie, the main character, she is adorable. She really is. And there are just so many funny things that happen in this book. The Duke himself, the Duke of Andover, he is very interesting. He is a little different to some of our other heroes, I guess. He's almost an anti-hero, actually. But I love how standoffish and austere and proud he is. And yet you can see him starting to change as he gets to know the main character. Definitely worth reading. And there is a sequel to it called Devil's Cub, where we see the main characters from These Old Shades as well as another character. This one, the main character, he's a real scoundrel or a rogue, whatever you want to call him. He's a lot of fun. But so is the heroine, Mary. She actually really charmed me. I'm surprised actually. I thought, oh no, I'm not sure if I can really like this character, but she has a lot of depth and a good foil for the hero, or anti-hero, I should say, in this book. Then there is Venetia. Venetia is the main character. She is just adorable, I thought so, and intelligent. She is a little bit older, more secluded, who meets her new neighbour, a rake. And he is a rake. Deverell. He is a more tormented character, I think. And I really loved their relationship and how it grew and developed throughout this book. Definitely one of my favourites. Sylvester. I love this one. Wow. Yes, Sylvester is a duke, very haughty, very much on his honour, who is looking for a suitable bride. Phoebe, I don't know if she's a suitable bride, but she is just too funny for words. What she does throughout this book is really, really funny, and yet at times quite sad as well. She actually decides to run away from him, which I thought was so funny. And the scrapes she gets into are just incredible. I really enjoyed this one. Definitely a favourite. The Unknown Ajax. Hugo, such a memorable character. I just loved this character so much. He comes into this very haughty, high-class family as the weaver's son. And he is looked down upon by the entire family because he is the heir apparent, but not classy enough for them. Oh, what he does, how they underestimated him was one of my favourite things. And I guess you could say this one dealt with class, with the differences in class and how people can be so judgmental based on that. I loved Hugo. He is definitely a favourite character of mine from the Heyer books. And I think this one is a lot of fun. In fact, I think it's one of the funniest ones. Frederica. The Marquis is the main hero. He's a bit of a rake, a bit of a scoundrel who comes into contact with this young family. Frederica is the eldest sister who is in London trying to marry off her beautiful younger sister. The scrapes that this family get into and the relationship that develops between her and the Marquis, I just loved it. He was not one of my favourite characters to begin with, but he developed so well and his sense of humour just killed me. I loved him by the end of the book. The Baluchistan Hound. Well, that's what I always remember when I think of this book, and that's all I'm going to say. Definitely worth reading. The Convenient Marriage. Horatia. She is too adorable for words, absolutely. I loved this character. I think actually this one might take place in Georgian times. The Earl of Rule is looking for a young bride and he chooses the beauty of the season. But it causes some distress to the beauty who is in love with someone else. Horatia, her younger sister, her young baby sister, comes up with a plan. Hori is just so charming. Definitely one of my favourite characters from Georgette Heyer's books. And what she gets up to is just so funny that you can't help but laugh. I also really liked the Earl in this one, though originally it took me a bit of time to warm up to him. And last but not least is the Grand Sophie. Sophie. Oh, I loved Sophie in this. She is a Juno, a large, tall, very self-possessed young woman who comes to England to meet up with some of her relatives and turns this family's world upside down. Charles, the eldest, does not like her, and they are constantly disagreeing. And yet Sophie has so much charm in this book. I just loved her character. Charles as well, he is one of these characters that you actually see change, and I really like when I see that. I know that historical romances are not for everyone. Some people even see a stigma attached to it. I don't. Perhaps when I was younger, but certainly not now. I think there is room for any type of book, pretty much anyway. But these are not your typical historical romances. They're certainly not the kind of books that you see today that have a lot of sex and other things happening. You don't see any of that in Heyer's books. It's more comedy of errors, comedy of manners, and they're usually extremely funny. If you like stepping back in time and feeling immersed in something that seems authentic, genuine, it gives you a glimpse into what the Regency era was like, for example, and you love a lot of humor, a lot of very memorable and charming characters, then I think you will love Georgette Heyer. And if you haven't tried any of her books, I highly recommend them. One last thing I wanted to say, there have not been any real adaptations of Georgette Heyer's books, which I think is a real shame. I think they would do really well on film as well, because you'll get to see all that sumptuous detail. There has been, I think, one film based on the book Reluctant Widow. I actually enjoyed it just because it is a Georgette Heyer book, but it could have been done better. I do hope that someday somebody will adapt some of her books. Anyway, that is all I have for you guys today. Let me know if you have read any of Georgette Heyer's books and what you think of them. You know, I would love to hear your opinions. And if you haven't read any of her books but are looking to try them, let me know how you find them. You know, I would love to hear that as well. Thank you all very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, then you can do the usual. You can like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I hope you all have a beautiful day, and I will see you next time. Bye.